welcome participants to this session on outcome-based assessment techniques and rubrics. Now, takeaway of this session will be, what is outcome-based assessment? See, more aware of the importance of method assessment in relation to student learning outcomes and program improvement. That's where I would focus on. More knowledgeable about direct and indirect assessment methods, become more competent on developing and assessing student learning outcomes, maybe course outcomes, program outcomes, become aware of rubrics as an assessment tool, become aware as how to design rubrics and use them to assess intangible skills, more knowledgeable about using adapting assessment methods that are currently in practice, and reviewing methods for assessing effectiveness and efficiency. So you have as experienced teachers, you have already been using assessment methods to evaluate student learning, student performance. When it comes to outcome-based assessments, then our focus gets a little more towards the outcome. See, when we say outcome, by now you are all familiar with outcome, program outcomes and course learning outcomes. These are measurable entities. Outcome-based model says that course outcomes and program outcomes are measurable, they are attainable, and so on. Now, outcome has the components of outcome are knowledge, skill, attitude, value, behavior. Now, please see here, knowledge and skill, they concern individual. Attitude also concern individual. लेकिन जो बिहेवियर है, सोसाइटल कंसर्न्स हैं, दे और कोलैबोरेटिव एक्टिविटीज हैं, they concern individual and society. That means the learning outcomes which are specific, intended learning outcomes, which are specified under the outcome-based assessment framework, they concern the individual, they concern the society, and they also are linked with human intellect, human mind, and human body. As for example, knowledge, skill are human intellectual, but it's cognitive, attitude, value, and behavior. These are affective, and motoring and annual, they are manual or psychomotor. Now, measuring them, assessing them is very special in the sense, let me call these are elements of outcome, learning outcomes. Now, measuring components or elements of learning outcomes need methods which are appropriate to them. For example, what I can measure with the help of, what I can measure discipline, how I can measure discipline or knowledge, same method will not be applicable to measure ethics or attitude or motivation and so on. So key question to consider during assessment are, what is expected from our graduates of the program? Here graduate means, is the American terminology, certificate is a graduate, AC, diploma is a graduate, degree is a, हमारे context में तो BTech को graduate कहते हैं, but this is how it's done. What is the expected as the student passes through the program, as regard his how much you know, what are his cognitive learnings, psychomotor learning, affective learnings. How do we assess them and look at it to improve them? Because please remember, outcome-based education says ultimate goal is to improve. Now let's understand how assessment. So assessment is the process of thinking and gathering data and information from multiple and varied sources in order to develop the understanding of the students, enhance his knowledge, and so on. So it's a way of finding out what students know and what student can do. You can say, sir, we have been doing all this. Yes, you have been doing this. You have been measuring the knowledge. You have been assessing what the student has gained as knowledge through examination system. But you have not assessed the outcome the way I have explained it to you. Now it is essential. In assessment, a student is involved, a faculty is involved. Teacher does the assessment, student is assessed. Now student should have the confidence that the assessment that is carried out by the faculty or the teacher is reliable. So we say assessment must be believable, credible, transparent, and fair, that it involves mutual responsibility of the faculty and the student. B, it is an activity which helps the student to learn more. It is a developmental activity. So it must be as reliable as possible. Then a reliable assessment enables to improve the curriculum because it helps us to find out where are the gaps, what is lacking. Ensure so reliable assessment helps in quality improvement. Now, the assessment that is made should be specific to the element that we are referring. So we always say it should be trustworthy and credibility, and it will depend upon how we carry out. Now, what forces us to assess? We are forced to assess because assessment serves as a tool for the industry to believe what we are doing. Assessment serves as a tool for the student to have confidence that they achieve something. Assessment helps the faculty to ensure that he has been able to achieve what he wants. So, driving forces for assessment are faculty, students, then accredited agencies, government authorities, administrators, and so on. So, essential, the assessment should be highly reliable. Now, it's interesting to appreciate that in the framework of outcome-based education, assessment is concerning the data collection. Now, the interpretation of data is termed as evaluation. So, in the domain of outcome-based education, assessment and evaluation are slightly different. So, assessment is the collection of data. Evaluation is a process that interprets data accumulated through assessment. Evaluation determines the extent to which program outcomes or program objectives have been achieved. So evaluation results in decisions and action that improve a program. So if I have to look at the gaps, then we evaluate the data. So assessment and evaluation should be understood properly. Assessment is a very useful process. It benefits the faculty, it is useful for the students, useful for the staff, faculty, useful for the university, and useful for the community, society. Because from the results of the assessment, community knows, university knows what kind of learnings, what kind of attainment of the students has been possible in the context of student learning. So it's a very beneficial. When I assess students, I am able to indicate, when I'm assess and evaluate students, I'm able to see whether how much students are improving. That means it acts as a technique for improvement to assess students' knowledge and competence in terms of desired learning or goals, to provide teacher instructor with feedback on the effectiveness of the teaching and how it might be improved, to provide information for employers. What about the student? How much student knows? What about knows? And so on. And then filter student for further studies. You know that based on their performance at the lower class, they go to the next class, higher class, for their professional advancement. So the institutional accountability and financial purposes, what kind of performance, what kind of assessment students they are implementing for the students. So it is important to be clear about the purpose of the assessment, what we are assessing, because it's unlikely that one single assessment tool will meet all assessment needs, because what you are assessing will require a special technique, special data collection, and so on. So in the present context, we are assessing student learnings. And those student learning are intended student learning in the real aim of outcome-based education. Now, this involves assessing the student knowledge in the discipline that they are. It involves their assessing skills. It involves this assessing practical skills, technical skills, then interpersonal and cross-cultural skills, leadership skills, problem-solving skills, entrepreneurial, and lifelong. That means there are a variety of issues of the student learning that we need to assess. These assessments the tools of assessment cannot be same for the various types of attributes we want to assess. For example, if I want to assess the team skills, if I want to assess the lifelong learning skill, or if I want to assess the knowledge, the technique that we use should be appropriate to that particular element I want to assess. So, outcome-based education highlights that your assessment should be as per the element of outcome you want to assess. So that's why it's called outcome-based assessment. Outcome-based assessment refers to assessment of learning outcomes, that is knowledge, skill, attitude, behavior, and manual. Now, if we look at the same method cannot be for these things. This slide is a humorous slide. I cannot test that everybody has to take the same exam to climb the tree. Example, the tree is to be climbed. Then a monkey will jump on it and climb. And we know that elephant can never climb. So assessment method of the climbing capabilities is not cannot be judged if you apply the same method. That means outcome-based assessment, in fact, is specific to the outcome, unlike traditional assessment. So assessment of learning outcomes, COs and POs, would require, after having designed COs and POs, we need to ascertain, determine, measure their learning outcome. So outcome-based education emphasizes that assessment measure must be relevant and appropriate to what is to be assessed. For example, we must consider how to match the method of assessment to different elements of learning outcomes. For example, a learning outcome such as demonstrate good presentation skills could be assessed by the requirement that each student makes a presentation to their peers. Examination is not a relevant assessment tool in this context. So, in outcome, we define assessment of two types: direct assessment and indirect assessment. Direct assessment methods capture students' actual performance, which demonstrate that specific learning has occurred. Actual performance, and student has produced some work, maybe question, maybe answer sheet, maybe record book, maybe project report, and so on. So the direct method requires student to produce work so that the extent to which learning expectations have been met can be evaluated objectively. Direct assessment methods are objective. Direct assessment methods help to provide key insight into what students can do, provide strong evidence of student learning. So they are the appropriate techniques of assessment. So direct method provide more reliable results. Example of direct method of student learning are university exams, semester annual आप जानते हैं, course embedded test देते हैं, assignments हैं, projects हैं. Now in this case, please appreciate student comes up with something tangible. Student comes out with some report, maybe some work which I can assess. That's what direct assessment method is. Now, indirect assessment method this is a very this should be appreciated that in the outcome-based assessment, in the outcome-based framework, we assess the cognitive skills by examination by direct methods. How about assessing the affective skills? You know affective skills? Like beliefs, attitude, behavior, motivation. How do I assess them? Now, outcome-based system provides the use of indirect assessment methods which capture students' attitudes, perceptions, or feelings about their learning, about the learning of the student. So this measurement type provides less concrete evidence of student learning, but can be used in conjunction with direct methods to gain more insight into the impact of the teaching and learning process. What is the impact? Please appreciate. What is the perception of the students? What impact in sense? Impact can be student is motivated. I can't measure by examination. I can measure it by taking feedback. So these indirect methods also include data that's related to students, but not directly tied to an outcome. For example, job placement rates, graduation rates. Please look at the progression rates, whether placement is increasing, whether students are more and more passing. So indirect methods can be useful in program improvement, but are not in general reliable method of outcome attainment. And the reason being, I have to incorporate the learning of the student corresponding to the affective domain. Now, affective domain elements like belief, motivation, they are intangible. That means to know the student perception about the intangible learning, indirect methods are useful. For example, surveys. Examination of commonly used indirect method of student learning, alumni, employer, student surveys, graduate exit surveys, departmental surveys. So feedback and surveys are indirect assessment methods. And please appreciate their role. They fulfill the requirement of affective domain as well. So we need to create realistic assessments on which everyone has a faith. Everyone believes that. So when I say these things, then we must focus on what are the outcomes which are being assessed, cognitive, affective, or psychomotor. Now, is the level appropriate given the objective for the course and lecture? What is to be assessed? Is that appropriate? Does the assessment process match the learning outcomes, learning outcome elements? Is the assessment organized such a way as to aid clarity and understanding of the requirements? Now, these aspects, which are not tangible, these can be implemented with the help of rubrics. We'll see that also. So, assessments are of summative and formative types. Summative is at the end of examination or at the end of semester, reveal what students have learned at the end of the unit course. They're implemented via tests, quizzes, and other graded course activities that are used to measure student performance. Now, continuous assessment, we are doing all this, used to measure student learning on the automatic basis. So it is implemented through internal periodic tests. Students receive input and feedback on their performance on an ongoing basis. These are the two types which are quite recommended. End semester examination, then the important thing is how to select an assessment technique. Remember, we have to assess program outcomes, we have to assess course outcomes. Now, how to select an assessment technique can depend upon what you want to measure. What is best for one outcome may not be appropriate for the other outcome element. However, all good assessment techniques share properties. Whichever technique you use, they should be reliable, they should be provide evidence on which we can take some action, cost effective. ऐसा नहीं है कि see, assessment is data collection. It should be easy to collect the data. It should be more reliable to collect the data. It should involve the student, faculty and stakeholders. Because that's why assessment technique should be such that it is easy to implement. When I say implement, mean collecting data. Data may be about any of the outcome elements. So selecting an assessment technique should give us, not it should match with the learning outcome element, and it should also be easily interpretable. It should not have any ambiguity. Data should not be difficult to collect or access. Now, outcome-based education system says preferably use direct or indirect methods wherever possible, qualitative and quantitative, for different courses. So this is what faculty has to decide. This is what you have to look at what is to be done. Then now the ultimate goal is to measure the learning outcome. So the assessment criteria that we use, there should be need alignment between teaching methods, learning outcomes, and assessment criteria. So correlation between teaching, learning, and assessment helps to make the overall learning experience more transparent and meaningful to the students. When I say learning experience, it means student learning process, implementation process, and confidence level also. So we have been talking about intended learning outcomes, COs and POs. Now, for CO POs implementation, there are specific teaching learning methods and appropriate assessment methods. This diagram shows that. Now, the teaching learning activities, learning outcome, and assessment, they must all be aligned, linked. Example, teaching learning activity for cognitive domains, teaching learning activities for affective domain, and teaching learning activities for psychomotor domain. There will be overlap, there will be differentiation. We should know which one is the most appropriate. Now, for example, for a teaching activity, lecture, tutorial, discussion, or laboratory work, which contribute to cognitive learning, then knowledge, comprehension, etc. And assessment tools are the examinations, the multiple choice questions, essay, lab reports, practical assessment, lab work, and so on. Now, in the affective domain, effective learning, that is the integration of beliefs, ideas, and attitudes, the learning activity for affective domain is group work, seminars, how student, because it's issue of attitude, behavior. Students demonstrate their learning, demonstrate how they are behaving when working in a group or when they are delivering a seminar. How good is the speaking skills, communication skills? And rubric is a method for this. Rubric is a method for this. Next is our psychomotor domain. Now that this can be emphasized, they can be made to teach, through lab work, through workshop, etc. And the assessment method is through project work, rubrics, performance, etc. Now, please appreciate how the teaching, learning, and assessment tools relevant to the particular outcome element should be understood and practiced. There may be overlap, doesn't matter. The faculties has to decide that. For example, we can always decide which method we want to use it. There is no, these are only guidelines. These are empirical. There is no rule. ये जरूर ऐसे ही करना है. लेकिन these bring out very clearly because it's more convincing, and so on. So learning outcome and relevant assessment method. For example, type of learning. Now then the assessment tools for COs and POs. After having looked at the course outcomes and program outcomes and the assessment tools, now the assessment tools for COs and POs, they may be similar or they may be specific. Now see, exit surveys and exit interviews. If they are at the end of the program, they are more relevant for the program assessment, PO assessment. Alumni surveys and interviews for PO assessment. Now, admission to graduate PO assessment. You can perform a group and internship assignment. It can be both for the program as well as for the course. Assignment report can be for the both. So please appreciate the various assessment tools which we are using. Depending upon what we want to assess it, they can be deployed for program assessment or for PO assessment or for CO assessment. Now here is a simple, I have just a summary suggested like this. Assessment tool, I have taken these POs, these are 12 POs of NBA. So there are direct tools which are more relevant. For example, tests are more relevant for the PO 1, 2, 3, 4. Assignments are more relevant 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. So this is just a summary that we bring out to bring out the significance and use of the method for the various POs as proposed by NBA. Now, this is okay for tangible things where students can produce the report. So learning such as ethics, attitude and motivation, reasoning, critical thinking, artwork, or music awareness, etc. How can we assess these? These are intangible. For example, we can't produce a document for innovation. We can't produce a work of music awareness. Now, these cannot be quantified or measured by the traditional methods such as examination. However, these can be imbibed and developed as has been demonstrated by research and neuroscience. What it indicates is that in order to, these can be enhanced. You will remember brain, they're all natural talents. Brain can be developed further. Now, in outcome-based assessment system says everything is to be measured and the learning has to be holistic. Holistic learning means learning outcomes not only has to be focused on the cognitive domain, but also on the affective domain. So in such context, the assessment, that means these are intangible entities, assessment, assessing intangible or indefinable attributes, learnings. These are assessed by their characteristics or the features which help to define them as decided by the faculty. Now, please appreciate what are the characteristics of a team player? What are the characteristics of a team player? What are the qualities of a team player? So, intangible attributes are to be measured by their attributes. Just to give you an example, suppose we want to assess the team functioning of a student. Now, for instance, says the person as a team player, we may specify the criteria is one of many. You can design your own. As is always talking, never allows anyone else to talk. This is one criteria. Please see this thing. This is one criteria. You want to design yourself. You can do that. Usually does not talk of, usually does most of talking, rarely allow others to speak. Right? This is again what we have decided. Listens but sometimes talks too much. That means this is again the criteria which we have decided. So share the work equally. This is again what we have decided. So these attributes are assessed with the help of rubrics. Now we decided the attributes and then we give them the values. If that is the case, we design a rubrics is an assessment tool, an evaluative tool for teachers and learners that establishes goals and expectations for learning. How much learning? What level of learning? Then provide guidelines. Then measure efficiency and accountability and so on. So rubric is a very powerful tool which help us to design the attributes ourselves. Please see here. And then assess those attributes. Now, when it comes to, so we have variety of tools for assessment. Now, when selecting the best assessment methods, then keep in mind relationship to assessment. Provide you with information you need. Assessment method. Its reliability, its validity, time factor, because motivation provide to the students respondent. Now, please appreciate one thing here again, that assessment tool is also a learning tool. Learning tool in this sense, आपको पता है बच्चे इम्तिहान से पहले बहुत बार कितनी चीजें वो रिवाइज कर लेते हैं जो उन्होंने कभी याद भी नहीं की होती हैं. What does it indicate? It indicates it helps the students to learn. When they select this assessment technique, examination assessment technique, internal test is the assessment technique, rubric is assessment technique, then it motivates the students to learn many of those things which he might have left it. Motivation is very important again because motivation is affective domain. So when I say a rubric as assessment tool, rubric is a scoring guide used to assess and evaluate the quality of students. In other words, it is a set of criteria for grading assignments. Now, assessment tools, assessment, it can be analytical. Rubrics may be analytic or holistic. In analytic, rubric is like a grid or matrix with elements which have performance, which has a criteria. Now, in this case, look at this slide. We have performance levels, we have criteria. Performance levels mean what is the degree scale that student has acquired, performance. And criteria means what attributes, what we are expecting from him. So analytic rubric has a format where the columns represent the criteria and rows represent the performance levels. And each descriptor specify identify measurable performance characteristics reflecting that particular level. Number of descriptors for each criteria is equal to the number of columns, that is levels. See, descriptor level means criteria. What is criteria? So this is the slide which shows this. So criteria listed in the leftmost column, performance level listed across the top row may be numeric digits or descriptive. Grid cells contain performance descriptors specified for each criteria. When using an analytic rubric, each of the criteria is scored individually. The example is criteria, the criteria, and so on. This is the format of the analytic rubric. Now, when I say outline of designing, how do you design analytic rubric? How I design this thing? Here I mentioned columns, first vertical column is the criteria. Now I am giving performance. Performance I can give the marks. Here I have 4 columns. You can have 5 columns. Traditionally, 4 column is accepted. So column, you can have the performance like advanced, proficient, developing, needs development. Now let us give me an example. Say criteria number 1. It's a description reflecting highest level of performance. The next column indicates description, achievement of mastery. That means quite good, quite good. Next is he is improving. Description reflecting movement toward mastery level of performance. And needs improved development means student is just beginning to learn that. Now I can say score 1, 2, 4, 3, 4, then that score is here. Supposing a candidate is at this level, then score comes here, and then overall score. Please appreciate the utility of designing the analytic rubric. Here we are specifying the criteria. Criteria will be relevant to the entity that you want to assess. So keeping this is the general template, and when I say rubric performance criteria, how do I decide that? Rubrics here is the performance levels, then rubric performance criteria, characteristics or attribute that student work should exhibit about the assignment, task or learning. That is, criteria are the specifications by which to judge the quality of the task. That is, they are performance attributes. Criteria should be related to the learning outcomes which are being assessed. For example, an oral presentation might be related to content, organization, delivery, and language. These are the criteria. Now, characteristics of good criteria. Now, please, I repeat. See, criteria for presentation are what are the content of the presentation, how the presentation is organized, how it's being delivered, and the language that the candidate is using, presenter is using. Now, when we specify the criteria, then criteria should be such that it is characteristic is measurable. Remember, essential and relevant, distinct from other criteria expressed in precise, unambiguous language. Phrased in precise, unambiguous language, thus indicating that the criteria that I choose, for example, I choose the criteria content, I choose the criteria as language, it should have these features. Now, how many criteria in a rubric? Most rubrics have 4 to 8 criteria, but it depends on your rubric. You may need more for a major comprehensive project and less for a simple or less detailed work. That means choice of criteria is is your choice depending upon what kind of these things. Now, please appreciate the difference between performance levels and descriptors. Performance levels are broadly defined as to the extent to which you want to score the assessment outcomes. This can be in grades, marks, or any other method that you see fit. Assign various performance levels to each of your criteria, usually 3 to 5 levels. Deciding how many levels you would want is more of a judgment. Decision is based on the learning outcome, assessment criteria, and the purpose of building the rubrics. And then as regards descriptors, descriptor describe what is expected of students at each level of performance for each criteria. Describe observable and measurable behavior. Indicates the degree to which the standard requirements are met. A descriptor tells students more precisely what performance looks like at each level and how their work may be distinguished from the work of others. Students will be more certain what is expected to each level. A descriptor helps the teacher more precisely and consistently. That means the significance of these. Now, how to define the performance criteria? By thinking about the learning outcome. Now I'm connecting the learning outcome of students to be assessed. For example, ask what do you want students learn from the task? How will students demonstrate they have learned? What knowledge, skill, behavior are required for the assignment? What steps are required for the task? What are the characteristics of final assignment? Choose criteria that reflect your instructional priorities and focus student attention on specific element of the assignment. So please appreciate when I design descriptors, use similar language and consistent wording in each descriptor across the scale. On the degree to which the standard is met should vary. Please appreciate this thing. How do I define the descriptors? Now, for example, knowledge of criteria is knowledge of subject matter, then application of knowledge. If I say knowledge of subject matter, it can be excellent, it can be adequate, it can be basic, it can be doesn't know it. These are descriptors. Similarly, application of knowledge is successful, satisfactory. So that's how we decide the descriptor and the corresponding levels. So here is an illustration of rubric for team player. Example, project team player. Say we want to assess how much the student has fulfilled his or her role. Suppose team of 4 students has been assigned a project. Criteria of work assessment are information gathering and research, fulfill team roles and duties, share work equally, and listen to teammates. Right? This indicating so, and the performance levels unsatisfactory, developing, satisfactory, exemplary, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then the performance descriptor assessing a student as an effective team player. So, criteria search and gather information, fulfill team roles and duties, shares work equally, listen to teammates. Now, unsatisfactory, developing, satisfactory, exemplary, and then the score. So we say here does not collect any information relating to the topic. 1 mark. Then we say developing, collect very limited information, some related topic, collect some basic information, collect great information. So there is a grading between what I am writing here. Does not collect information, collects very limited information, collects some basic information, collects a great deal, and that's the corresponding score depending on this. Now, please see here, the moment you specify these things, student gets a hint what is important, where he can score more, what are the attributes he should imbibe himself, herself, so that he is able to get more marks. So, indicating that a rubric is not only assessment tool, rubric is a learning tool also, is a motivating tool also. Now, defining alignment to be assessed using should be an assignment that includes several student learning program objectives. Student learning. Rubric elements should match with student learning objectives. Faculty should play a significant role in developing and implementing rubric. Faculty should agree with the utility of assessing through the rubric. Please appreciate these things when to use the rubric, because only then it will serve the purpose and will be helpful to the students in enhancing their, not only help the teacher to, to assess it, but the learning tool also. This is very important to keep in mind. Now, we can prepare assessment rubrics. The steps involved are define outcomes and goals for the rubrics, choose the rubric type, analytic or holistic, define the assessment criteria, define the performance levels, write performance descriptor for each level of rubrics, then revise and review. Remember, creating an effective and efficient rubric is not an easy task. It involves wide discussions and multiple inputs from various sources. So use analytic rubric if you want to assess a major project, provide formative feedback about students, and assess multi-dimensional assignments. So the typical activities that can be assessed by rubrics are intangible thinking, processes like thinking and physical skill, use of equipment, oral communication, project work habits. Then examples are thinking and reflective activities, playing musical instruments. These are something which can be assessed with the help of rubrics. Well, these are just illustrations for this. Now, I want to share it with you. You know what are complex problems? Complex problem को कैसे assess करेंगे? These can be assessed with the help of rubrics, because rubrics, what is a complex problem first? Complex involves too many unknowns and too many interior factors to reduce to rules and processes. For example, blockchain is a complex problem. How will you assess this? There is no algorithm that will tell you how to respond. The solution to complex problem don't work as well as complex. As complicated and complex problems are different, because complex problems are interdisciplinary. So if you have to apply rubrics for complex problems, then we need to understand the problem definition, the relevant standard, and so on. So the reason I'm saying all this is that I will not dwell on this. I will proceed to demonstrate how to use the rubrics for higher order thinking, how to assess higher order thinking skills. Higher order thinking skills, what are the higher order thinking skills? Critical thinking, creativity, evaluation, analyzing. You recall your Bloom taxonomy? Upper three levels correspond to higher order thinking skills. Now, in the critical thinking is the mental process of skillfully perceiving, analyzing, interpreting, synthesizing, and evaluating collected information from various sources, such as observation से data आ सकता है, थिंकिंग से आ सकता है, रीजनिंग से आ सकता है. दैट्स व्हाट contributes to critical thinking. So we can design a analytic rubric for critical thinking. If we take the criteria as interpretation, analysis, evaluation, and presentation. So, for example, accomplish very good thinking skills, competent, developing, and beginners. So, this is how we can do it. Now, when I say why use rubrics, we use rubrics to improve student performance. Rubrics lead to better student performance when students understand assignments and expectations before they begin. They are more likely to fulfill them. They know what specific criteria and standard of excellence will be used to rate them. Rubrics provide students with information, feedback. Immediately they know what is being done. And the benefits are rubrics promote thinking and learning. Rubrics inspire fairness because it involves rubrics beforehand what student is required to do. So they know if they are up to this level, they will be getting more marks, more grades. So rubrics have a lot of advantages which should be considered. Now, utility rubric assessment tool is rubrics help to measure higher order thinking skills, complex tasks, enable students understand their expectation, student self-improvement, motivate student to better performance, improve feedback to students, make scoring easier and faster, make scoring more accurate, unbiased and consistent, and improve feedback to faculty and staff. Now, please appreciate the utility of this. Now, when I am saying this, then we are bringing out the fact that when I'm using rubrics, I'm in fact student and teacher, they are collaborating in assessing and expressing what they want. So the rubrics as a very powerful tool, direct and indirect methods, they are the other traditional methods. Now, outcome-based education says deploy rubrics to ascertain those learning of the student which cannot be measured. So the assessment that we have should be in alignment with the COs and POs. Assess all COs by question paper is not possible. Instructor can get target for each CO of his or her course. Average mark obtained assessment, alignment, attainment gaps can be identified. Instructor can plan to reduce the attainment gap, etc. So these are the advantages that we derive from this. If we wish to discover the truth about an educational system, we must look at its assessment procedures. And I mentioned earlier, assessment procedures relevant to the outcome element that they considered, that brings a lot of confidence. So assessment measures to help improve many things. Examples, they help to change. Assessment measure help to improve curriculum. Example, changes to the assessment plan, revision of intended learning outcomes, revision of measurable approaches, measure of data collection, changes in targets, and changing in sampling. Changes in the curriculum. They help to bring out changes in the curriculum. For example, changes in teaching techniques. See, what is a curriculum? Curriculum involves not only syllabus, it involves teaching learning methods, resources, assessment, and so on. So changes in teaching techniques, revision of prerequisites, revision of course sequence, revision of course content, addition of courses, deletion of courses, then revision of admission criteria, revision of advising standards, improvement, and so on. So assessment helps to improve in many things. So outcome-based assessment cycle would be assess student learning outcomes, then strategize to accomplish the outcomes, areas and methods of assessment, data collection and interpretation, changes to enhance student learning. So the assessment cycle of outcome-based assessment is fairly elaborate and gives information on these things. Now, in fact, the outcome of assessment process leads to student improvement, identify student strengths and weaknesses, review, assess, and improve the effectiveness of different teaching methodologies, review and assess, improve the effectiveness of curricular programs, improve teaching learning effectiveness, provide useful administrative data that will expedite decision making, communicate with the stakeholders. So outcome of assessment process is quite useful. In fact, to sum up, assessment measures help to improve student learning, identify student strengths and weaknesses, review, assess, and improve the effectiveness of different teaching strategies, review, assess, and improve the effectiveness of curricular programs, improve teaching effectiveness, provide useful administrative data that will expedite decision making, communicate and connect better with stakeholders like industry, parents, and so on. And thanks for your kind attention and participation. In fact, assessment can be a very good tool for continuous quality improvement as well. When we are looking at a continuous quality improvement, then we should look at what does improvement means. Improvement means improving the program objectives, program outcomes, and focuses on continuous activities, what was done, why was it done, how it's to be done, and the link between these things. So that is what is possible. In fact, this is a continuous improvement framework. And if I do that, start with program outcomes, because what is measurable is program outcomes. Now, then we identify the indicators, identify assessment method, then carry out the assessments, collect data and evaluate it, then interpret results, identify the needed improvements, implement improvements, identify performance, starting with that. So assessment and evaluation, these are all help to improve the system in a continuous fashion. So continuous improvement involves, in fact, the inputs from NBA a bit accreditation requirement. You are aware of that. I think I can skip these things. That's how the outcome-based assessment enable us to continuous improvement. That means assessment, evaluate, improve. Assessment, evaluate, improve. For PEOs, for POs, for COs, etc. That's how assessment is very helpful in continuous improvement as well. When continuous improvement involves all the learning outcome and program objectives also. And of course, the curriculum